Hey, what's up, everybody? It's Bassrock here with my buddy Nico. You good puppy. Just kidding. Get out here, bitch. Let me let you. Just kidding. We love him. So I'm here doing what I'm calling the style sessions, which is essentially we're going to be going over different genres of music and how to create them. So whatever your cup of tea is, from trance to electro house to French house to what we're doing today, which is big room house. And so the first thing that you might be asking, if anything, is what is big room house? And you're probably not asking that because it's become huge over the last 2 years, 2 or 3 years, you know. And essentially what it started from was Sandro Silva did a track with Quintino called Epic, or if you believe in ghost producers, Martin Vortwerk. But, you know, I'm ambivalent. So, and essentially to quote him, he's actually a decent friend of mine, Sandro Silva, that is. I interviewed him when he came to Seattle once, him and Oliver Twist, and what he said was he was trying to recreate the sound of Holland hardstyle, which is essentially what Holland hardstyle is. It's just, obviously it's hardstyle that originated in Holland, and it's just that big driving kick drum with the pitched percussion and reverb supersaws, as he said it. And that's a lot of what it is, but there's a little bit more than that, obviously, because this is its own genre and not just Holland hardstyle. So we're going to get right into it. What I have here is a track I've been working on called Marathon. It's named after the Battle of Marathon in Greece, and after the runner, one of the Greeks, ran back to Athens. He ran like 35 miles to bring them the news of their victory, and that's where our modern-day marathons come from. And I just thought it would be a nice motif to write to, and so I made it a really driving track. So I'm going to play the track here for you really quick, and apologize for the noise on my computer. It's a high-end laptop, but it's still just getting hammered by all the synthesizer work I've been doing. But don't worry, you should be able to hear this adequately. So I'll just play the track now. Who is ready to jump? Okay, so that's basically the track. Sorry, I was lagging a little bit, but you got the general idea. It's kind of hard to run screen capture and FL Studio at the same time with all the stuff I got going on. It lags sometimes even when I don't have it on. But so what we're going to tackle first is the kick drum. And like I said, there's the pitch percussion going along with the kick. And this one I don't actually have the pitch percussion because I decided to take it out. I'll tackle the kick first though. So generally, just for the kick drum itself, you have 3 parts. Unless there's the high end, you have the high end boost here. You have the low end punch, and this is the high end punch too. The low end punch, which is one of the most important parts, in my opinion, of the big room kick, kicks in general, and you have the low end. And depending on if you have a pitch percussion or not, you may not use as much low end, but low end punch and high end punch are still very crucial to this kick. And so essentially, this is what a pitch percussion sounds like, and this one sounds like shit because I'm not using it. But that's the general idea, and how you make this sound, and there's, you know, a bunch of stuff you can do to it to make it sound good. It's essentially just a sine wave. You can use a saw wave if you want, depending. Depends on if you've, I don't know if you've seen my other videos, but the one that talks about harmonics, if you've seen that one, saw waves have lots of harmonics, and so they can be very harmonically rich, and you can get some nice sound out of it, especially after you distort it, which is a key point of this. And sometimes, if you really want to, if you want more of a hardstyle type kick, you can just crank that bitch. obviously that's very basic sounding. If I were doing like pitch percussion, it would never sound that basic or this basic. But this is pretty close to what it would sound like just in a normal big room house track. And then you're also going to want to sidechain it or do a mimic sidechain like I do with grow speed, because the pitch percussion and the kick are going to be sharing a lot of frequencies, and you don't want that. So what you're doing here is making sure that it drops down when the kick hits, and you want to do a somewhat fast sidechain so it sounds like it's still hitting at the same time as the kick, in a sense that sounds like it's part of the kick. If you do it one that's not so fast, it just sounds like a fucking bass line that you put it on, and it's not as fun. And then obviously you want to low pass it. The low pass really depends on what you're trying to do with the kicks. You might want it a little bit higher, up to 1K if you're doing more of like a Showtech style kick where it just sounds like hard style. And so that does it for the kick. Now as for the synths, I'm going to start with the super saw because we were talking about that. So I have just some basic super saw synths here to accompany the grimy lead that I have, and I'll go to the grimy synth in a bit. So just basically sounds like this. Here's one of them, and here's another one. Nothing special. Essentially what a super saw is, just to explain it really quick if you want to make your own, it's essentially 2 to 4 oscillators all playing saw waves, hence the saw part of the super saw, and they're all detuned, and you can put them at different octaves if you want, but the detuning part and the saw wave part are what's important. And this one has some white noise to add some crispiness to it, which is nice. But that's generally the two things you want to know are saw waves and detuning. Don't detune them too much. If you go past 0.50 on the, which will make sense to you if you've worked with detuning before, don't go past 0.50 generally, because our ears will stop recognizing it as being at that key. So yeah. Going on to other synths now, I like to do really grimy bassline driven stuff. So I have this synth. So generally, I work with a lot of saw waves with my oscillators because, if you've watched my video on harmonics, like I said before, the saw wave has a lot of harmonic information, so you can get really rich sounds out of that. Especially if you want to do vocal stuff. What I mean by vocal stuff is not actual human vocals, but if you want it to sound like human vocals, like there was the whole thing about modern talking with Massive. That's a waveform on Massive, and that's what 100% No Modern Talking is talking about when Knife Party did their EP called that. But because there's so many harmonics, harmonics are very key to how your voice sounds, how the human voice actually sounds. So when you want to mimic something, you want to use a saw wave. You can achieve that through filters, and talk boxes are good to do that as well. But anyways, so that's bulk of my work is done with saw waves. I also use a lot of distortion, so I have a foldback on here, and I have actual multiple distortions because I also have a blood overdrive here. Blood overdrive is very handy if you're in FL because it's a very balanced distortion, and you can still keep some of your dynamic range actually. So your attack, decay, sustain, release. And the next part of the synth I'm going to be going over actually is the reverb, and this is key to big room house. I could do a whole nother video just on reverb. So really quickly, what reverb is that reverb is designed to mimic different spaces. So right now I'm in my living room, and the reverb time of the living room is probably about 0.3 seconds. And what that means is essentially reverb time, and if you see a setting called RT60 on a reverb, those are the same thing. And what RT60 is, just to give you a little bit of history, is when they were building opera houses and concert halls for orchestras, they needed to find ways to build these places so that the orchestras and operas sounded good. And essentially, there's a way of measuring volume called dB/SPL. It's SPL is sound pressure level. And essentially, 60 dB/SPL, which is where the 60 from RT60 comes from, is how 60 dB SPL is how loud an orchestra is at full blast when it's, everything's playing and it's at the, the crescendos are happening. It's generally around 60 dB, and an RT60 is essentially how long it takes for 60 hertz. I'm sorry, not 60 hertz. Oh God. How 60 dB to die down to 0 dB SPL. And that's what an RT60 is, and you can find that out through absorption coefficients of different materials in a room. It's all complicated stuff, but essentially that's RT60, and it's calling here decay or reverb time R. they're all the same thing. And so that means that it's probably not, if it's not very fast, if it's just 0.5 seconds, that's not going to be a very big room. And that's what I have here on this main synth, just to give it a tiny bit of character. Pre-delay is another important one. If you want really full reverbs but you don't want to muddy stuff up too much, pre-delay is important because there's essentially 3 parts of reverb. There's the initial sound, early reflection, and the reverb. And the initial sound is just me going, woo! The early reflection is when my voice hits the far wall that I'm facing and comes back and is the first part of the reverb that I hear. And sometimes it's so quick that you may not even realize or just pick up on it in a sense. And that's what the pre-delay is. And so if you'll notice here, I'll play this really quick. And by the way, the reverb is just all the other reflections bouncing off and coming back to you. So if I play this, I just realized that I have that stupid kick playing. So there we go. Okay, so it sounds, there's a little bit of reverb, but it doesn't sound very big. Now if I turn up the pre-delay, and a little tip, I'll give it to you after I do this actually. Just here's what it sounds like with longer pre-delay. So yeah, that's what it sounds like. So obviously it sounds bigger because it takes longer for that early the early reflection. That means it's traveling longer to hit that back wall and come back, which means the back wall is further away, hence a bigger room. So that's one way of getting a larger sound without muddying up your sound with the decay or the reverb timer, the RT60. Now with pre-delay, one trick is, and this is also a trick with, don't you give me any lip, you fucking slut. One tip is to, everything in dance music can be mathematically calculated to achieve a higher aesthetic. So essentially, at 128, each kick equals 500 milliseconds. Okay, a little bit of math. This is kind of a boring part, but it is very, very important. Sorry, there's some stuff going on in the background. But essentially, so I have it at 125. It's at 126, but at 125, that equals about an eighth note. So when that pre-delay hits, it's going to be in time with the music, and so you can do that with compression as well to achieve just it'll sound better generally. Compression is a whole other thing. I'll talk about that later. But that's essentially reverb, and a lot of things I like to do, especially I played with this track, was essentially you want to utilize different reverb times because there's that'll you can make it seem like one synth is close and one synth is farther away, and that'll give it more of an aesthetic feel, a nice aesthetic feel, I should say. It'll make it sound like they're at different parts in the room, and it'll make that room just come alive. And so you'll notice that when I start this out, it just sounds like the synth's close, but then it sounds like the main synth moves a little farther away, but then that super saw is way in the background, and then sounds like that synth is even further, and that super saw is even further too, and there's other elements that are coming into play. So you really want to juggle your reverb with synths, and that's we call that spatial placement. So you want to play with your spatial placement a little bit. And so the next thing we're going to tackle is drums, and I don't have a lot of drums, so I'm going to be really quick on this section. So if I go down here, I know I have one. Go all the way down. Oh, wow, I landed right on it. I am such a lucky guy. You won't be able to hear this one really well. I'm not going to play it over here because you won't be able to hear it because there's just so much going on already. So if I play it here, and I don't want to really put this here. I'm going to work on the percussion a little bit, but I like pitched percussion. It sounds really cool, and this is really going to help make the track sound more driving. And that's the good thing about percussion. That's a lot of why we use percussion, is to help drive the track. So that's that percussion. But I like to use synthesizers as percussion just with the rhythm, and I like to achieve sidechaining and use changed note lengths to make them sound percussive, and so I don't really need a lot of percussion in this track anyways because it's so driving already. And last thing we're going to tackle is fills, and that's where some of my percussion does come into play. So I have these snares here, and snares are a big part of big room house. We have, I wasn't too smart about EQing this. I could probably turn this down a little bit, but if you look at this, did I click on the wrong one? I did. Shame on me. That's something else. Okay, so you have 3900 contributes to a lot of harshness. Also 1K contributes to fatigue, so those are sometimes you want to cut those out a little bit if your tracks get annoying to listen to. So around 8K is brilliant, so I want some brilliance in my snares, so I boosted at 8K, and right around here is where the low end is. I didn't want to go too far down because that would be, I felt like that might interfere with some of the kick and whatnot, even though the kick's not going, but I wanted a little more of the mids rather than the lows, so I boosted right above the fundamental, where some of the harmonics are still going to be strong. And so that gives it a lot of character, and I added a large reverb because there's lots of reverb going on. And so that's one fill. And what I have here is, this is a very smart thing to do, is when you're creating fills for big room house, you want to take stuff from the break and put it back into the drop. And that's because you're repeating themes, and people are going to start, you want people to memorize those themes. And when you're writing themes especially, and this is a whole other thing that I'll be tackling with melodies and stuff, you can tell themes are good if it's something that you can hum to yourself or whistle to yourself. And this is some, I can hum that to myself, so that's a good theme. And I want to repeat that theme, so I'll probably be using that in the break as well, but I'll be changing it up a little bit just to give it a little variation so people don't get too sick of it. But it's a good enough theme that people probably aren't going to get sick of it very fast, even if I repeat it a bunch. But what I'm going to be doing, and this is, by the way, I'm trying to make this a collab with my buddy, but he hasn't jumped on yet. He's busy with some other stuff. But I'm probably going to have him write the break. But for now, I wrote my own chords that are just nice 4-chord structure. Whoops, started from. Sorry. It's really soft. It's got a low pass filter on it right now. And that's what I would use if I was writing this track. I have a bunch of 4-chord structures I have. 4 chords are really good because the themes you write for big room house are generally going to work well with 4-chord structures. So stick with 4-chord structures if you can. If you want to rise above that, great. But as long as your theme's good and your track and all your mixing and whatnot is good, people won't think any less of you for it, or they shouldn't. And if they do, then screw them. So when I play this fill, and there's different parts to this fill. You notice I have some drums going, I have some synths, and there's lots of movement. It goes from very soft to powerful, and that's how you build tension within tracks, especially within arrangements. And I'll talk more about the arrangements in the second part of this video tutorial on big room house. And I also have some effects rising. This is actually a downlifter, a Vengeance downlifter, and yeah, so you have effects too, and so there's just all sorts of different stuff. And on that note, one thing I will cover before we go to the next part of this video is the final builds for tracks. And so I have, generally you just want to do very simple stuff if you to accompany. So I have this, and it rises. In the interest of time, I'm not going to go too into it, but you want just basic rising synths, and that's pretty complicated synth. I'll maybe do a tutorial on building that one. But another thing I like to do is take whatever synths you had and put them at the same, just put them all on the key that's the track is centered around. Like you can see, these are essentially all centered around G sharp. And then at the end of the track, I'll put them all at G sharp, basically on their respective octave levels. And then I'll use pitch bending to bend them all up, creates nice tension, and it actually transitions nice into that little build-up. And that's the basic part of that. And I'll be covering some arrangement stuff and some more tips and tricks for big room house in my next video. Thanks, guys.